Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. We are from group 4. We will present about social dimension of L2 learning. This is the presenter Muhammad Rizkullah Ramadan, Hana binti Saadah, and Hafid Mahmudi. I will explain about the unbearable ineluctability of the social context. A category cited by Donato, 1988, note that L2 proficiency is similar to painting a camelot. Camelot's colors rely on its bodily surroundings. Any one illustration turns into inaccurate as quickly as that historical past change. This additionally applies to the entirety of L2 learning. The radical reorientation in the direction of the indispensable position of social procedures in SLA attracts proposals from social constructivists, social cultural, and post-structuralist theories. Social constructivism tells us that reality is not given naturally. It does not lie out there to be apprehended by the person mind. Instead, truth is created to human dealers and social groups. And social cultural makes the individual thought finds the supply of studying in social communities, gaining knowledge of its own hand in historical and social procedures, and emerges among dealers in a given context. Only processes, activities, and things to do are real. Post-structuralism telling us that the structures of human which means and human social recreation that had been proposed by way of structuralist thinkers are insufficient to give an explanation for the human condition, and that there is nothing that can be regarded or understood independently from the discourse that names and criticizes that knowledge. Vygotskian Sociocultural Theory in SLA. Lev Vygotsky used to be a Russian psychologist who in the first quarter of the 20th century developed an influential theory of cultural historical psychology. It was designed in response against behaviorism and its special focus on lower-level intellectual operation, and additionally in opposition to mentalism and the duality of thinking and environment that characterized Piaget's psychology. Its important aim was once to allow the learn about of consciousness, defined as higher-level mental operation concerned in language, literacy, numeracy, categorization, rationality, and logic, Landolf and Thorne. In the context of L2 learning, these two SLA researchers, Landolf and Thorne, have opened the way for many others to reconceptualize L2 mastering via a Vygotskian prism, meant to a regular and shiny growth in the contemporary dimension and scope of Vygotskian SLA research. Mental pastime is constantly mediated by way of tools, physical and symbolic. Through the use of tools, human beings can alternate their reality. However, the use of tools also modification them. Self-regulation and language meditation. Regulation can be of three kinds: object, other, and self-regulation. Object, when human beings have yet to examine how to manipulate their world and themselves in the context of carrying out a given activity, they orient closer to objects. Although regulated happens usually when they take part in new, complex things to do with the research of different co-participants. And self-regulation is the perfect stage of regulate. At the best possible stage of regulation, people orient to their very own mental activity. If they are successful of carrying out an endeavor generally independently. Lantolf and Thorne note that the last accomplishment of self-regulation in the L2 is if mediation can be performed by L2. For example, when personal speech, inner speech, or both are carried out in the L2 incarnating fantastic L2 types and meanings. Findings about inner, private, and social speech in L2 learning. Inner speech, which is generally sustainable at some point of self-regulated mental activity, can be studied solely indirectly. In an e-book, Therapy of the Concept, Maria de Guerrero reviews genius imaging methodologies as nicely as introspective methodologies involving questionnaire and interview responses about mental rehearsal. The latter methods have been employed in SLA studies, starting with the Guerrero's pioneering study where she documented many mental strategies employed by using L2 beginners of English in Puerto Rico. Private speech, in particular, is central to the study of mental functioning because it constitutes a hyperlink between internal speech, to which it can also convert through definitely self-regulated activity, and social speech, from which it takes its source. In stages of personal speech, for example, affective markers such as "oh boy," "oh no," "oh my god," "okay," "oh well," "no, I get it," "alright, let me see," which can take place in the L2 or the L1, have been attested a good deal greater frequently among lower-level proficiency newbies in many of the studies. Social speech must now not be equated with the cognitive interactionist concept of learner-initiated negotiation of form. Swain has also investigated the mediating role of language in L2 learning, often concentrating on the find out about of social speech. She is guided by using the tenet that verbalization, modification, thought main the development and learning, and she focuses on what she calls languaging to bring the Vygotskian view of language as system in flight, Tocqueville, Beller, and Swain. Alternatively, then as product, which is typically conjured in the cognitive interactionist notions of pushed output at some point of language production. Social learning in the zone of proximal development. Zone of Proximal Development, or ZPD, defined as the distance between what a learner can do in the L2 if assisted through others versus what she or he can accomplish on my own. Wells notes that the ZPD is not a fixed property of an individual. However, alternatively constitutes a double for learning that is created in the interplay between contributors in specific settings and therefore have to be considered as emergent due to the fact to ongoing interplay all through joint pastime can open up unexpected new attainable for learning. Negative feedback reconceptualized. Feedback used to be not conceived as transfer of linguistic statistic from a tutor to a tutee. as is often conceptualized in the cognitive interactionist approaches. Feedback was once defined as help that is mutually negotiated between experts and novices, from Algebra and Landolf. A benefit of exploring poor feedback, in particular and L2 instruction, in general, within the Vygotskian framework of the ZPD, is that the dichotomies blur and a continuum is conjured all along these dimensions, which can change inside the same interactional pastime dynamically as well as over more than one successive activities, as co-participants mutually facilitate the gradual and non-linear emergence of self-regulated mediation in the course of L2 activity. Interaction is social, conversation analysis, and SLA. When applied to SLA problems, this framework characterizes L2 mastering as primordially socio-interactional exercise and focuses on the specific evaluation of naturally taking place spoken interactions. Conversation analysis, or CA, has now substantially increased and is practiced by means of a large and various interdisciplinary neighborhood in the United States, Europe, and Australia, with a shared activity in studying the organization of thought in interaction. In the context of L2 learning, CA began to be applied to L2 records first in Denmark through Alan Firth and Johannes Wagner, as they studied oral interaction amongst non-native audio systems who used English as a lingua franca for business-related purposes in Europe. In little more than 10 years, CA for SLA, as it has been termed, has grown into its personal place of study.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good day everyone. Hello my friends. Hello our lecturer, Ma'am Masito. How are you today? I hope you're still alive, still healthy, and you're doing your day very well today. Okay, here I am, Muhammad Rizkullah Ramadan, and my friends Hana binti Saida and Hafid Mahmudi. We're going to show you about our presentation. In this presentation, we discuss about skill acquisition theory. So let's begin to the presentation. Skill acquisition theory. Skill acquisition theory accounts for how people progress in learning a variety of skills, from initial learning to advanced proficiency. Skills studied include both cognitive and psychomotor skills in domains that range from classroom learning to applications in sports and industry. The basic claim of skill acquisition theory is that the learning of a wide variety of skills shows a remarkable similarity in development from initial representation of knowledge through initial changes in behavior to eventual fluent, spontaneous, largely effortless, and highly skilled behavior, and that this set of phenomena can be accounted for by a set of basic principles common to the acquisition of all skills. That is the definition. So let's go to the next slide. The constructs of the theory. There are three types of skills shall be studied in skill acquisition that have been divided and developed by psychology researchers. These are cognitive and associative and autonomous. These three stages are characterized by large differences in the nature of knowledge and its use, as reflected in various ways through introspection, verbalization, and most importantly, various aspects of behavior, especially under demanding conditions. Initially, a student, learner, apprentice, or trainee may acquire quite a bit of knowledge about a skill without ever even trying to use it. So what is cognitive, what is associative, and what is autonomous? Cognitive is the first step of skill acquisition. In this stage, the learners do something for the first time, without experiences and training before, and without knowledge about what they do. In this stage, human brains try to stimulate human body and do something. And our brain try to understand what we do, or the way we do something for the first time. The learners need to give performance full attention, for example, watching and observe. Then, the learners try to understand what is needed performed by the body. The feedback must be given clearly, simply, and limited. And the learners may find many errors in this first stage. There are 6 characteristics of cognitive stage. You learn what is needed to perform a skill. Frequent errors occur. Attention to decisions and step-by-step procedures. Have a high attentional demand. Tend to perform the skill slowly. Requires lots of feedback. The next stage is associative. This is the next level of skill acquisition step. After our brain understands the way we do something and our body accepts the stimulation, it's time for our brain and our body practice for many times, again and again. The result is not important in this stage. Perhaps we succeed and perhaps we fail. But that doesn't really matter, because the most important thing is the process. The learners perform and practice the skill under a variety of situations. Learners begin to make use of intrinsic and kinesthetic feedback, then begin to compare the performance to the mental model. The learners must pay more attention to the process and the feedback. There are 5 characteristics of associative. The first is refine the accuracy and consistency of the motor skill. There is a reduced number of errors. Performer gradually gets more successful and fluent. Learner begins to make use of intrinsic or kinesthetic feedback, and then begin to pay attention to concurrent feedback during performance. The next level is autonomous. Autonomous is the last step, or we can say it is the result of passing the previous stages. In this stage, our brain and our body achieve the result of our training. Our body finally can do what the brain orders automatically. It becomes a habitual. Some learners may only reach this stage after many years practice, and this stage the learner can pay attention to increasingly complex tactical and situational consideration. Skill improvement continues but less rapid. Skill improvement developed by self-evaluation, mental practice, and self-motivation. And the learners also achieve the high levels of smoothness, efficiency, accuracy, and performance without stress. There are 4 characteristics. The first is sequencing and timing of the subroutines is automatic, less conscious attention. The second is process larger chunks of information that occurs without their attention. The third, performer analyzing own performer and adjust own actions. And the last, high levels of smoothness, efficiency, accuracy, and performance without stress. So let's go to the next slide. Well, let me show you a simple chart. This chart is the development of skill acquisition. Let's make an example for this chart that this is the first time we are trying or we are learning how to swim. You can see there is number of problems 20, 40, 60, 80 and 100, and you can see duration to solution. It is the time 200 seconds, 400 seconds, 600 seconds, 800 seconds and 1000 seconds. For the first time we learn how to swim, or the first 200 seconds, we can find a lot of problems in the water. Like we don't know how to swim, we don't know how to breathe in the water. This stage called cognitive stage. After that, in 400 seconds, our brain tries to stimulate our body and try to understand and find a way how to swim, how to move our arm, how to move our feet. It's still cognitive stage. And next, 600 seconds. It is associative stage. In this stage, our body and our brain have already found a way how to swim. So in this stage, we just do practice and practice. For many times we try again and again. Even that we fail, that doesn't really matter because the important thing is the process. You can see the number of problems is begin to solve in this stage. And then let's jump to 1000 seconds. This is the last stage, or we can say it is autonomous stage. The result of our exercise or our practice. You can see that there are no more problems, or we can see that we only find just little bit problems here, because our brain and our body can do how to swim like it's a habitual. I hope you understand what I've told you. So I'm going to tell you about the evidence of skill acquisition theory. Now I will tell you about the evidence of this theory. Any overview of the behavioral data should start with Newell and Rosenblum in 1981. Not because it was the first study in this area, but because it was seminal in that it brought together empirical data from so many different studies about so many different forms of skill acquisition and proposed both a quantitative model and a qualitative interpretation for this mountain of data. Some of the Some of the domains of learning include motor behavior, reading, decision making, and problem solving. Day Kaiser in 1997 found that the concepts of proceduralization, automatization, and specificity of procedural rules accounted well for the learning curves, correction time, and error rate during a semester of practice of a small number of grammar rules. Robinson in 1997, on the other hand, found that his data on the learning of an ESL grammar rule did not fit the predictions of Logan's competing theory of automatization through retrieval of specific instances from memory instead of rules. She showed that extensive oral comprehension training, while increasing processing speed in comprehension, did not preempt a substantial number of errors in production, and that conversely, early production did not hinder acquisition. Rogers in 2011 worked with learners of Italian to show that automatization of verbal morphology developed as a function of practice, but that it was less advanced in production than in comprehension, providing further evidence still for the specificity of procedural knowledge. Zooming in on proceduralization, and De Jong and Perfetti in 2011 show in detail how in the case of proceduralization such as late occurrence and phonation or time ratio to develop as a result of repeated but gradually speed up practice with a task, either identical or similar. I think enough from my presentation. The next will be continued by my friends Hana binti Saida and Hafid Mahmudi. Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Okay, now in skill acquisition theory, when we talk about second language acquisition, there are some skill for understanding theory. Sometimes it mentions about the developments through various in psychology, and then from behaviorism to cognitivism to connectionism. So here we know that when the teacher explain about some theory, we know that what we can understand about what the teacher said is different among students. So here there are two common misunderstandings in skill acquisition theory. So they are the idea that skill acquisition either explain everything about second language acquisition or nothing. In other words, it is combined with other theories to be the one and only valid explanations of the said phenomena we call second language acquisition. So only just one theory that is right. So some people misunderstanding about this theory. And the second one, the idea that is incompatible with a variety of empirical findings. So when we find empiric in the field, sometimes the idea it's too difficult to get. So there are common misunderstandings in skill language acquisition. In the next explanations, I will explain about an exemplary study by De Jong and Perfetti in 2011. The researcher De Jong and Perfetti See, the participant in study 20 ESL students in the United States who were given practice in oral production with the 4-3-2 process. They had to tell a story first for 4 minutes, then in 3 minutes, then in 2 minutes to improve. They did 3 times in as many trainings, and then there were two the other told 3 different stories. The researcher wanted to know whether the 4-3-2 sequence would lead to procedure, whether this learning effect would last until the delayed test several weeks later, whether it would transfer to new stories, and whether the two conditions would yield different results. Proceduralism was operational That's all for explanation about the exemplary study
Now
by the
I
Jong
will
and Perfetti
explain
in
about
2011.
explanation of observed finding in SLA and also skill acquisition theory and the explicit or implicit debate. And then explanation of observed finding in SLA. There are several findings in the observation in our handbook. There are observation 7, 9, 10, 5, 6, and 4. You can see on my slide. Okay, the first explanation is for observation 7, 9, and 10. The findings can be explained in terms of several factors, such as whether a student can receive instruction, produce outputs, and apply certain structures if instruction and practice are explicit, with input and output are not integrated. Here, automation requires procedural knowledge. Proceduralization itself requires declarative knowledge, di mana pengetahuan prosedural itu merupakan pengetahuan bagaimana melakukan sesuatu, termasuk pengetahuan tentang skill, teknik, and also a method, atau urutan langkah-langkah logis pada penyelesaian masalah yang disusun secara sistematis. Pengetahuan prosedural juga bisa disebut sebagai pengetahuan bagaimana. And then, pengetahuan deklaratif itu adalah informasi faktual yang diketahui oleh seseorang. Pengetahuan yang dapat diungkapkan baik dengan lisan maupun tulisan, atau singkatnya itu disebut pengetahuan konseptual. Okay, next, for the explanation about observation 5 and 6. Students have different abilities in achieving proficiency levels in language because of different levels of understanding declarative abilities. Students also indicate that most individuals have variation between linguistic domains because they differ in aptitude, instruction, and also practice. Next, the observation number 4. The explanation is the fact that learners follow a predictable path in their development for a given structure also fits with skill acquisition theory, especially if it is understood somewhat more broadly than in merely linguistic terms. Fakta bahwa peserta didik mungkin mengikuti jalur yang dapat diprediksi dalam perkembangan mereka untuk struktur tertentu dan juga sesuai dengan teori perolehan keterampilan, terutama jika itu dipahami secara lebih luas daripada hanya dalam istilah linguistik. We go to skill acquisition theory and the explicit or implicit debate. As stated in the previous section, skill acquisition theory stresses the importance of the distinctions between declarative and procedural knowledge and sees the transition from mostly declarative to mostly procedural as the norm in skill development from Anderson 2007. Skill acquisition theory then does not reject the possibility or usefulness of implicit learning, but focuses on how explicit learning. Given how difficult it is to determine whether knowledge is implicit or explicit, even under controlled laboratory conditions, it stands to reason that the implicit or explicit distinctions in this narrow sense should be of little concern to second language learners and teachers. Proceduralization, however, as well as a certain degree of automatization of explicitly acquired knowledge are necessary conditions for practically useful levels of proficiency. Teori akuisisi keterampilan sama sekali tidak menyangkal perannya pembelajaran implisit, bahkan bisa ada sinergi antara dua jenis pembelajaran untuk aturan tertentu atau distribusi peran antara keduanya ketika suatu variasi, aturan, pola, atau keteraturan yang berbeda perlu dipelajari. Kemudian, teori akuisisi keterampilan tidak menolak kemungkinan atau kegunaan pembelajaran implisit, tetapi juga berfokus pada bagaimana pembelajaran eksplisit, yang seringkali satu-satunya kemungkinan realistis untuk masalah pembelajaran tertentu karena kendala waktu atau logistik. Itu dapat melalui proseduralisasi dan otomatisasi belajar secara eksplisit pengetahuan mengarah pada pengetahuan yang secara fungsional setara dengan pengetahuan implisit tepi. Mengingat betapa sulitnya menentukan apakah pengetahuan implisit atau eksplisit, bahkan lebih apakah pembelajaran itu implisit or eksplisit, bahkan di bawah kondisi laboratorium yang terkontrol, masuk akal bahwa implisit or eksplisit dalam arti sempit ini harus menjadi perhatian kecil untuk bahasa kedua. Okay, that's all for my explanation. Thank you.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Muhammad Rizkullah, and here I am. I would like to present to you about social dimensions of second language learning. I will present to you about chapter 10.15 until 10.20. And the first content is the outcomes, what is learned through second language socialization. The second is sense of self is social identity theory. The third, second language learners, identity and power struggles, examples from circumstantial second language learning. And the fourth, close impact of identities on second language learning, examples from elective second language learning. The fifth, technology mediated communication as a site for socially rich second language learning. The last one is never just about language. So let's go to the first content. The outcomes, what is learned through second language socialization. Based on my conclusion, I've concluded that there are two main outcomes from learning second language socialization. The first is socially situated. The first is in socially situated language use. One must simultaneously say the right thing, do the right thing, and in saying and doing express the right beliefs, values, and attitudes. The second is appropriate learner behavior, included be attentive and mentally imitating and rehearsing the verses and at a different pace for each student, eventually being able to faithfully perform the sacred text, adopting similar pronunciation, sequencing, volume, and embodiment as the melum and without making mistakes. Next is sense of self is social identity theory. I've concluded that there are four concepts from identity theory. You can see this. The first is investment. One main concept is investment. If learners invest in a second language, they do so with the understanding that they will acquire a wider range of symbolic and material resources, which will in turn increase the value of their cultural capital. The investment that are given The investment that a given learner makes in learning a second language can only be understood by consideration of her identities, desires, and changing social world, as all three contribute to the structuring of different investment at different times and across contexts. The second is communities of practice. This is complemented by the claim that intertwined with their investments are second language learners' affective and symbolic affiliations, various communities of practice. Some of them are real, immediate communities in which learners strive for acceptance or legitimate membership. The next is imagined communities, or communities that exist at present only in the imagination, and which learners forge on the basis of their past memberships and life history, as well as on the projections they make for a better future. The last one is the right to speak. The final element of identity model is the notion of the right to speak. This right and the power to exercise its unequal, distributed, and often second language learners find themselves positioned by others as speakers without that right. The next is about second language learners' identity and power struggles. Examples from circumstantial second language learning. You can read the slide and I will explain to you. Circumstantial second language learning involves situations where memberships of a language minority must learn the majority language for reasons over which they have little choice and which are typically associated to larger scale world events such as immigration, economic hardship, post-colonialism, war or occupation. Identity research in this context has shown that learners strive to construct positive identities for themselves from a position of marginalization, and that they do so by reference to the identity options available to them in the multiple and contradictory discourse of family, school, workplace, media, and so on. Particularly in institutional contexts where language minority learners enjoy little power, such as schools, they are seen to struggle to fashion and negotiate identities that may allow them to exercise their agency and be viewed positively by others. The next is close impact of identities on second language learning. Examples from elective second language learning. I've concluded that there are two impact of identities on second language learning. The first is for elective language learners as much as for circumstantial ones. The extent to which they can exercise their agency and be who they want to be in the second language is constrained by the agency. of other speakers, who, like them, also draw on ideologies rooted in their surrounding discourses. The second is the socially constructed categories of gender, race, and class are relevant for elective second language learning in that they affect foreign language learners' investments, desires, and identity negotiations in a number of important ways. The next is technology mediated communication as a site for socially rich second language learning. So, my conclusion is the production and consumption of online and traditional texts that draw on multimodal forms of meaning making, including language, image, and sound, has also been identified as a particularly important side of language and literacy learning that multilingual users, particularly young ones, can exploit with positive results for learners' academic achievement as much as for their identity development. The last one is never just about language. There are three conclusions that I have made from this chapter. The first is second language learners need to struggle to appropriate the voices of others. They need to learn to command the attention of their listeners. They need to negotiate language as a system and as a social practice, and they need to understand the practices of the communities with which they interact. The second is second language learning show learners with higher linguistic competence being bypassed by gatekeepers in favor of others with lesser linguistic expertise, precisely because of race, gender, or lack of material and symbolic resources. These influences were more important than linguistic and even socio-cultural competence in those contexts. The last is second language is being judged as a competent and valued social being, never just a matter of sheer second language competence, even under greatly expanded definitions that include gestures and concepts or normative ways of saying, doing, and being. I think enough from my presentation. If I have mistakes, please forgive me. And forgive me about the noise. Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
What do you fill me up? Buttercup baby, just to let me down and mess me